Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jesse Carbonda, the Executive Director of the Hoosier Environmental Council. I apologize for our delay. We've been having a couple of technical difficulties, so we really appreciate your patience. One thing that we hope is better than our last webinar is the sound quality. So please do share your feedback with us regarding the webinar. And we're going to just get started right away given the start of our webinar. Our webinar today is called Defending Environmental Protection and Advancing the Sustainable Economy. And want to make note that the Twitter hashtag this time is going to be #InGreenEconomy. And feel free to pose questions again via the chat, and we will answer all of them at the end of our presentation. This will be recorded as it was last time on our YouTube page. Our next webinar is provisionally scheduled for Friday, March the 29th. This is the big picture for our webinar today. We're going to start off with Kim Ferraro, our Water Policy Director, talking about defending rural quality of life from some really troubling legislation. Then we'll shift over to Tim Maloney, our Senior Policy Director, to talk about both public transit and open spaces. And finally, I'll wrap up things talking about protecting our public health in general, specifically IDEM funding, and then also about promoting clean energy. And then finally, we'll reserve the last few minutes for Q&A. So first, some introductory comments. HEC's focus in general is to advance policies that are good for the environment and good for the economy. And we think this is substantively good public policy, but we also think it's good messaging when we think about who our audience is in terms of the legislators that we're trying to appeal to. They really are very much concerned about the state of the economy, and we believe that we can compellingly talk to them about environmental issues from an economic perspective. Some facts about Indiana's economy. Astonishingly, we rank 40th in the entire country in our per capita income, and we have the 13th highest unemployment rate in the United States. Both facts that obviously underscore why focusing on the economy is so important. Over a 25-year period, entrepreneurs accounted for all net job growth in the United States according to the Kauffman Foundation. And young professionals are a major segment of the entrepreneurial base in the United States. And it turns out that in research compiled by CEOs for cities, young professionals want to live in cities that are clean, attractive, green, and safe, hence underscoring why it's so important to promote the environment from an economic perspective. Now I'm going to shift over to Kim Ferraro, our Water Policy and Agricultural Policy Director.
Thanks, Jesse, and happy Friday, everyone. I'm going to be talking about Senate Joint Resolution 7, which is entitled The Right to Fish and Hunt, but as I'll be talking, it's also about the right to farm too, and Senate Bill 373, which eliminates the rights of whistleblowers and the public's right to know about where their food comes and about some public health and safety and environmental issues. So starting with Senate Joint Resolution 7, the right to fish and hunt, here's what it actually provides. That the people have a right to hunt, fish, harvest game, or in the important segment that I'll be focusing on, to engage in the agricultural or commercial production of meat, fish, poultry, or dairy. So basically creating a constitutional right to engage in the commercial production of meat. Well, what exactly does that mean? You think about raising livestock and farming, the picture on your left is from the recent Super Bowl commercial for Dodge Ram, and shows the traditional rancher, farmer, sort of idealizing a way of life that no longer exists, versus the CEO of Tyson on the right-hand side, Donnie Smith, which is one of the largest producers of pork and poultry in the United States and indeed nationally. So farming, do we mean farming as in 1913? Or do we mean farming as in 2013, which is now? And these are photographs of examples of the interior of confined animal feeding operations where thousands of animals are confined indoors without access to sunlight where their manure is stored in outdoor open manure lagoons, often sprayed on the land, untreated, without regard to proximity to waterways and other people who live nearby. So really, whose rights will be constitutionally protected if SJR 7 is allowed to amend our Constitution? A little bit of facts about the company names that I've posted on here. There are 4 corporations in the United States that control over 85% of beef packing in the United States. Those would be Tyson Foods, Cargill, Swift, and National Beef Packing Company. 2 corporations, Tyson and Smithfield, that control over half of pork production. 40% of milk production is controlled by Dean Foods. So with this much of food production controlled by so few people, what we've seen is really huge monolithic farming operations becoming standard across the country, including here in Indiana. What that means to Indiana is that our small-scale family farms have increasingly disappeared or transformed into these enormous livestock factories with manure lagoons that concentrate the smells and odor and, as I said before, make living conditions unbearable for some people who live close by. These factories have also polluted our rivers with millions of gallons of spilled manure, killed tens of thousands of fish, impacted recreation and tourism, which is a $9 billion industry for the state, has impacted local economies. An example of Henry County, where local businesses are not coming because of the high concentration of animal feeding operations. So this is more than just about an environmental impact. It's about a quality of life impact and an economic impact. And as a result, we've seen communities calling on our state and local leaders to take action, and some, in fact, have had to turn to the courts. So back to what SJR 7 does, now that you understand that this really isn't about farming in the traditional sense, given that most of our food comes from factory farms. What really is wrong with amending our Constitution to provide a constitutionally protected right to engage in the commercial production of meat? Well, one, if you consider Article 1 of Indiana's Constitution, that's where our Bill of Rights are, our right to freedom of speech, our right to vote, our right to freedom of religion. These are considered core constitutional values that are said to be universal to the human condition. And so just as an initial matter, thinking of the right to engage in an industry as being somehow on par with those fundamental rights is out of balance and not correct. Also, within the first sentence of Article 1, we all have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And intrinsic in the right to liberty is the right to economic freedom, the right to start your own business, the right to work for whomever you please, and in fact the right to engage in the commercial production of meat. So equally, we all have the right already, as do farmers and industries that engage in this. They don't need to have enhanced constitutional protection, and doing so actually then will limit the state's ability to rein in bad actors in that industry, as there are in many other industries. And it won't just be at the state level, it would be also at the local level. Case law that is interpreted government attempts to regulate core values demonstrate that things like zoning laws and eminent domain that pose a material burden to an Article 1 constitutionally protected activity would be deemed unconstitutional. So putting in question even some of our existing laws that have been passed under a different standard could possibly be held unconstitutional as applied to factory farming. Pivoting to Senate Bill 373, this is it's entitled the Agricultural and Industrial Operations Bill. It doesn't really capture what the bill provides. It would make it a criminal act for a person to indirectly harm the business relationship between an ag or industrial operation and its customers by entering the property of that industry and taking a photograph and then sharing that photograph with the media. That would become a criminal act under the law. So what's wrong with that? The true purpose of SB 373 is to make sure that consumers, i.e. the customers of factory farms, continue to have the image that you see there on the left of the happy farmer when they go to the grocery store to buy their meat and poultry products. what we know is that based on pictures that have been taken inside factory farms, the happy farm is really not reality. The reality is what these pictures show. And in fact, investigations where pictures like these have been taken have played a vital role in the national level in exposing animal welfare, food safety, and environmental issues related to industrialized agriculture. An example of that is in 2008, where the Humane Society undercover investigation of a slaughter plant in California revealed horrific animal abuse and resulted in the largest meat recall in U.S. history. If SB 373 becomes law, those sorts of undercover investigations become illegal and a criminal act. Also, photos like these showing common, and I underscore legal, industrial livestock practices. These are 3 pictures of a common practice in the egg industry where male chicks are just discarded live in dumpsters because they are of no economic value to that industry. And this is legal, so this would then become a constitutionally protected right under SJR 7, and also the public won't know about it if SB 373 becomes law. We also won't know about conditions about where our bacon and pork chops come from, because pictures like these were taken by employees of the facility showing unclean conditions, and actually this is legal, what is shown here. Pigs are kept in gestation crates, and this is a common and legal activity. But again, going back to the happy farmer picture, many consumers who see this reality may make different choices about the food that they eat. So really at the core is, with both of the measures, with SJR 7 and 373, is elevating the rights to constitutional protection of industrial livestock facilities, allowing them to operate at this increased legally protected level, then eliminating the public scrutiny that would flow if folks are allowed to see what really goes on in those facilities. And we wonder what this means for quality of life for rural Hoosiers, as well as our ability to know where our food comes from and how our environment is impacted. What we're asking everyone to do is to please contact your state representative, ask them to oppose 373, also ask them to oppose SJR 7. A little background about where both of those are. SJR 7 is now in the House and has been assigned to the House Judiciary Committee. So even contacting those committee members would be very helpful as well. We don't know yet where SB 373, it has not been assigned to a committee in the House yet. Oh, I'm sorry. And now I'll be pivoting to Tim Maloney, our Senior Policy Director, to talk about expanding public transit and open spaces.
Thank you, Kim. Now we're going to transition to a couple of legislative issues that really reflect the connection, the positive connection between environmental protection and economic sustainability, and that's public transit and open space protection. We'll start off with a discussion of the public transit legislation that's pending in the General Assembly right now. But first, a little background about why we believe transit is important, both from economic standpoint and environmental standpoint. Economic benefits of transit include mobility and choice for our citizens, how we get around, whether it's an automobile or transit or bicycle or pedestrian. This adds to that menu of choices by improving our public transit options in central Indiana. Also among the economic benefits are the job benefits, which are at 2 levels: job creation in the transit industry, in related development that goes along with transit, such as transit-oriented development. For example, in St. Louis, they've seen over $2 billion of new economic development near their MetroLink transit stations. Charlotte has seen $1.5 billion in new development within 5 years of opening one of their light rail lines, and also providing access to jobs by people who want to work but are challenged by the fact that they either can't drive or don't have access to an automobile. And of course, the environmental benefits, transit can save energy in terms of reducing oil and gasoline use. Public transit nationally saves about 1.4 billion gallons of gasoline each year, and by moving more of our travel away from automobiles and to transit, it will reduce the air pollution and carbon emissions from motor vehicles. And then there's also the aspect of the changing demographics, and that will demand that we provide more transit options for our citizens. Our population's getting older. About 1/5 of all Hoosiers will be 65 or older in the next 20 years. We know that younger generations, the millennials, are losing interest in driving and in cars. About 20% fewer 18-year-olds have obtained driver's licenses within the last about 30 years. We know that population is migrating back to urban areas, and people are just generally driving less because of high gas prices, and they want to use options to the automobile. And again, this all is resulting in a growing demand for transit, which is demonstrated here in the growth in transit use in Indiana. Indigo's bus system up significantly in the last 2 years. The South Shore Commuter Rail in northern Indiana, ridership up over 2011, and statewide a 4% increase in transit use from 2010 to 2011. Quickly on our Central Indiana Transit Plan that would be enabled by the legislation that we'll describe in just a minute. This Indy Connect plan, as it's known, would provide for doubled bus service in the first 10 years, would add 5 express bus routes and 5 rapid transit corridors, which could involve either bus rapid transit or rail transit. Those decisions, the exact mode of transit is still to be decided, but bus rapid transit will play a big role in that. Circulator buses and expanded bike and pedestrian trails as part of the plan as well. The costs and revenue for this plan, it's about a $1.3 billion 10-year plan in terms of capital costs, and when it's fully up and running, about $150 million in annual operating costs, compared with an expected $201 million in annual revenue, again, by the time the system is fully up and running, with those revenues coming from the existing state transit funds, local funds, including existing property taxes, and the new regional transit tax and fares as well. All of this authorizing legislation is captured in House Bill 1011, which will authorize the Central Indiana counties to schedule voter referenda on whether to create this regional transit authority and impose a new local transit tax. It's a local option income tax up to 0.3%. Marion and Hamilton counties are expected to go first in this plan, but the other counties also have the option of opting in now or later. And if you're part of a family of 4 earning about $50,000 a year, your cost would be about $10 a month. The status of House Bill 1011, we're very pleased to report that just earlier this week, House Bill 1011 passed the Indiana House of Representatives by a vote of 56 to 39. There was strong bipartisan support among the members who voted in favor, and there were, among the 8 House sponsors, are both Republicans and Democrats, led by the chief author, Representative Jerry Torr from Carmel. Next, for House Bill 1011, it will now move to the Indiana Senate, where it has been assigned to the Local Government Committee, and we hope that a committee hearing will take place within the next week or so. We also expect that the bill will have to be recommitted to the Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee before it moves to the full Senate floor. And right now there are 5 Senate sponsors, again, Republicans and Democrats, including lead sponsor Patricia Miller, along with Luke Kenley, Jim Merritt, Greg Taylor, and Mike Kreider. The take action step is very simple. Contact your state senator and urge him or her to support House Bill 1011. Now quickly to expanding open spaces, and this is a budgetary item, but a little background to start out with. Indiana does not have a great wealth of public lands. Just over 5% of our land area is in public recreation land ownership. Because of the activity of humans over the course of settlement here, we've had a big impact on our natural lands area, and you can see the breakdown of what we currently have left in terms of forest, wetlands, and prairie. And to touch on the economic value of outdoor lands, in addition to their value as fish and wildlife habitat, they have great economic value as well. The outdoor recreation industry estimates that in Indiana alone, outdoor recreation generates about $9.4 billion a year. And when you drill down specifically to wildlife-associated recreation like fishing, hunting, and bird watching, that benefit is nearly $2 billion a year, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Our focus in land conservation funding is seeking an increased appropriation for the Indiana Heritage Trust, our cornerstone state land acquisition program, highly successful in terms of acquiring land, leveraging private and federal money, and engaging all kinds of partners in that effort. Our request for the Heritage Trust is $2 million a year in a general fund appropriation. We have some work to do there. Right now the line item is just $97,000 a year. Also looking for more funding for the Bicentennial Nature Trust, a program that Governor Daniels put in place, and this program provides matching funds for state, local, or federal projects, in contrast to Heritage Trust, which is just a state program. The ask there is $2.5 million a year. And then finally, there's the Clean Water Indiana program, which helps fund voluntary conservation programs on private lands. And it's a win for the environment in terms of better water quality, a win for the economy in terms of reduced water treatment costs, and greater recreational dollars. We've had some success there thanks to Representative Mike Karikoff of Kokomo, who introduced an amendment to the budget bill which was adopted, increasing Clean Water Indiana funding to $1 million a year, which was our goal on that part of the clean water and soil conservation programs. So we're asking you, when you take action, to ask your state legislators to support increased conservation funding as we proposed for Heritage Trust and the Bicentennial Nature Trust, and those would be part of House Bill 1001, the budget bill. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Jesse Carbonda, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Tim. Wrapping up here, part 3 of our presentation, we're going to be focusing on protecting public health and expanding clean energy. First, a note about public health, which is the first topic here. We're really going to focus the conversation on the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and we realize that this agency sometimes attracts strong and polarizing views on its role, both by environmentalists on the one hand and industry on the other. And then some in the media will characterize this as a great clash, either between industry and IDEM or the environmentalists and IDEM. Our view is that there are certain areas where environmental advocate groups like HEC do have real common ground with IDEM, and then there are areas of major policy difference. What I wanted to do is spend a couple minutes talking about IDEM from an economic perspective. Obviously, IDEM's role is to contain pollution and help to reduce exposure to toxins that hurt people's health. But we also want to talk about IDEM from an economic perspective as the basis for justifying sustained funding for IDEM. What you're looking at here is a brownfield, and one of the things that IDEM does is provide technical assistance to companies that are seeking to convert brownfields into greenfields. And we see this as very important in helping to revitalize industrialized towns like Anderson and Muncie that have a lot of these brownfields and making them more economically compelling cities to invest in. What you're looking at here is an underground storage tank. This is another area that IDEM works in, which is to inspect these and make sure that they're not leaking. If just a little bit of this oil were to somehow find its way into the groundwater, it could have really profound negative impacts on drinking water quality. So you can imagine how important it is for these underground storage tanks to be properly maintained and inspected to ensure that a community sends a good signal both to its current residents but prospective residents as being a place of a high quality of life. You're looking at a private drinking water well here, and this is another area where IDEM works to ensure that these drinking water wells are not getting exposed to various contaminants from industry and industrial agriculture. And so again, it's important for a rural community to be able to tell both its current residents and its prospective residents and current businesses and prospective businesses that the drinking water here is clean and healthy, and that of course helps economic development. Finally, the smokestack kind of symbolizes the fact that it's also important that we have a level playing field in Indiana. There are many companies that very much want to do the right thing and to proactively comply with environmental regulations at the federal and at the state level. But then there are others that are not so inclined to do so in order to cut costs. What IDEM does when it's functioning properly is making sure that there's a level playing field so that there are not any companies that feel at an unfair disadvantage, or an unfair advantage, I should say, in terms of the fact that some companies are failing to comply with the law and they are complying with the law. In principle, proper enforcement funding for IDEM ensures that everyone is in compliance with the law. So HEC's position on the IDEM budget is to make sure that it is sustained compared to the previous 2 fiscal years. So what we're hoping will happen at the end of this legislative session is that there is sustained general funded dollars for IDEM. What you're looking at here is the fact that IDEM is funded by both federal dollars, general fund dollars, and dedicated revenue. General fund dollars are those that come from the broader pool of taxpayer money that's heading to the Indiana state government. So 18% of IDEM's budget comes from these general funds. We want to make sure that's sustained going into the next 2 fiscal years for IDEM. So to take action here, please tell your legislator to support sustained funding for IDEM, as well as the Indiana Department of Natural Resources in HB 1001, the budget bill, which Tim talked about in the context of conservation funding. We'd like to see sustained funding here. I want to end my part of the conversation talking about clean energy, and specifically about the bill that we foresee being the biggest energy bill in play in the 2013 legislative session, and that is SB 560. This is a bill being sponsored in the Senate by Senator Hirschman, Merritt, and Weiss, and in the House by Representatives Cook and Van Natter. At the heart of SB 560 is policy that deals with electric transmission and electric distribution, the nuts and bolts of getting electricity from power plants to people's homes and businesses. Proponents of this bill will say that the way that this policy is structured will lead to more investment in transmission and distribution, and they will also argue that it will lead to accelerated investment in electrical transmission and electrical distribution. However, opponents will argue that the way this policy is structured will actually lead to higher electricity rates and potentially excess investment in transmission and distribution. There were a wide range of opponents that opposed the initial bill, SB 560, when it was initially heard in the Senate Utilities Committee. Those opponents included various Indiana manufacturers who argued that such a public policy would lead to increased energy bills, consumer groups, as well as environmental groups. And you might ask yourself the question, why do environmental groups care about this type of legislation? Our argument is that the way that we get our electricity today in Indiana is generally through what's called a central power plant, basically coal plants. Now, we know about all the kinds of impacts that these central power plants have. Now, the biggest concern we have about central power plants is carbon pollution. While there's going to be a lot of retrofitting being done on these power plants that will reduce conventional type of pollutants like mercury and particulate matter, greenhouse gas emissions will not be controlled largely by these investments. So what we want to see is the electricity system shifting to a completely different model called distributed generation, which is largely about customers, whether they're businesses or residences, producing power on site in ways that are oftentimes zero carbon emitting and are also environmentally superior in other ways. Now, the problem with SB 560 is that it would lead to a perpetuation of the existing system of central generation, in our view, because you're essentially building more and more transmission systems and distribution systems that are reinforcing the existing model and distorting the economics and incentives facing utilities to make the transition to this more distributed generation model. Could SB 560 be redeemed in some way? Is there any way that HEC could come around to supporting this bill? We think there are two really important conditions that are necessary. One is to see greater regulatory review of transmission and distribution projects compared to what's currently proposed in SB 560. Because again, we don't want to see this bill being used to abuse the right of utilities to invest significantly in transmission and distribution. Secondly, we would like to see amendments added to SB 560 that promote more renewable energy and promote more distributed generation. Because of the fact that HEC is in this tough position as to where we will ultimately come down on this bill, we're not giving a specific call to action, but what we will promise to do is continue to keep you informed about developments on SB 560 through Facebook and through Twitter. We also want to spotlight Bill Watch, which is a really great repository of information that you can find on our website, hecweb.org. And what you'll find there is the array of bills that HEC is working on, their status, and our position on those bills. It's a wonderful way to learn about specific things you can do to take action. And fortunately, even though we've started late, I'm thankful that we have enough time for us to now shift over to questions and answers. So we are getting ready to pull up questions. Please type those in. We've gotten feedback on sound quality, but we haven't gotten any questions yet. So please type those in, and we will get to them. Okay, we've got a question from Nancy regarding the Right to Farm amendment. what's the likelihood of the right to farm amendment moving forward? That's for Kim.
Sure, and I want to make sure everybody can hear me this time. I noticed that we had trouble before, so I certainly apologize. The right to farm amendment actually passed last year for the first time and has passed the Senate and is on its way through the House now. And the way a resolution works is it has to, in order to do a constitutional amendment, it has to go through the legislative process 2 years in a row, and then it will go to the voters. We're hoping to stop the measure now, which is why we're really ramping up our efforts to educate people on this very dangerous measure, because once it goes to the voters, we fear that given the title, the right to fish and hunt, and sort of the ambiguous nature of right to farm in benign sounding language that is, that many people won't understand the true implications of that. So in answer to your question, we think that this is the greatest point in the process to try to defeat this measure, and hope that all of you on the call will take action.
A question for Tim: what would be the biggest obstacle for passage of the public transit bill from the Senate?
Well, there are several considerations in the Senate that all the senators will take into account, whether they believe that questions have been well answered about the financial aspects of the system. From a political standpoint, legislators distant from central Indiana will be interested in what is the opinion of central Indiana senators, both Republican and Democrat. So that's, we expect the same kind of interactions as we saw in the House in terms of those kinds of questions getting asked and information being provided, and just working through the process. I expect we may see some amendments in the Senate, friendly ones and perhaps unfriendly ones, and that's just part of the process. And the alliance that's working in favor of this bill will be prepared to answer those and make sure that the public is speaking out on their support for this bill.
Thank you, Tim. And a question for Kim: what other states have right to farm amendments?
That's a great question. 16 other states have rights to fish and hunt amendments. One other state has a right to farm amendment, and that's North Dakota. And so we would be then the second state, if this measure passes, to have a right to farm measure.
Thanks. Thanks, Kim. And we have another question, which is, how do I get involved? How can I become an advocate? You know, I'll take a stab at that question. Some of the things that can be done would be attending what are called third house meetings. And these are sponsored by chambers of commerce and League of Women Voters chapters in different parts of the state. And these are basically town hall meetings where legislators come in. They may make some basic remarks giving their perspective on the legislative session, but they'll then pivot to Q&A. And you'd be surprised how influential you can be as a citizen advocate by attending these, because as we've talked about many, many times before, it just takes just a handful of people to communicate their concerns about an issue to get a legislator engaged. There just simply are not enough people involved in the legislative process, which makes your voice amplified. So in addition to attending third house meetings, other things you can do are write letters to the editor, and HEC is always glad to help our supporters in drafting those letters to the editor. All you need to do is drop a line to Fallon French, our outreach coordinator, at ffrench@hecweb.org. Tim, I'm wondering if you could spotlight a property that has come into being because of the Indiana Heritage Trust Fund.
Sure, Jesse. The Heritage Trust, over its existence, has completed about 400 projects throughout the state of Indiana. These can be in holdings, say in state parks. It can be additions to state fish and wildlife areas. One of the projects that the Heritage Trust played a role in was the very successful Goose Pond Fish and Wildlife Area in southwest Indiana, 8,000 acres of former wetland and marsh area that has now just become well on its way to becoming a world-recognized bird area with some species of birds actually changing their migratory patterns to be able to stop at Goose Pond. There are new nature preserves that have come into place from the Heritage Trust, an important in-holding down at Yellowwood State Forest. So it's overall it's added about 58,000 acres of new state lands to our system.
Great, thanks, Tim. And a question for Kim. Kim, I'm wondering if you could spend a little bit more time talking about how the Right to Farm Amendment would impact other economic activity in rural Indiana, because it seems that one of the challenges and the sort of uphill nature of dealing with the Right to Farm Amendment is the fact that a lot of legislators may innocently think it's about protecting the little farmer, and you've talked a lot about how this is in some ways about protecting big corporate ag. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this might help, how this amendment could harm other economic sectors in rural Indiana.
Sure, Jesse. Well, I think as an initial point, it's really critical to understand that Indiana has traditionally been a property rights state, and meaning that we feel very strongly that individuals should be able to use and enjoy their property in the way that they want to without outside government interference. We're also a really strong home rule state in that we believe local issues are best solved by local governments. Well, both our long-standing beliefs in both of those principles would be greatly undermined by this constitutional amendment, because it elevates the rights of one industry to conduct its activities without government interference and over and above the rights of other property owners to use their properties in the way that they want to. So to give you an example, when we look at case law that has interpreted how a government might be able to regulate an activity, we know that non-constitutionally protected activities are able to be regulated with the government only demonstrating that they've got a, quote, rational basis to do so. Some good reason that serves the public interest. That's really the only thing that the government has to show. But to regulate a constitutionally protected activity, the government would have to show that it's not materially burdening that activity, and it doesn't matter how great of a law it is or what sort of social public good it provides. If it in any way infringes on the constitutional right, it would be unconstitutional. So, for example, a zoning law that would try to address a factory farm issue or an industrial livestock issue could be held, and likely would be held, unconstitutional if SJR 7 would be enacted. So severely limiting the ability of local economies or local governments to address their local issues.
Thank you, Kim. There's curiosity about what kind of renewable energy amendment might be part of SB 560. There's a very interesting proposal that the wind industry is involved in advancing, and basically the idea would be that Indiana utilities would adopt what's called a competitive procurement process, whereby when a utility is at a point where it needs to add generation to its investment, maybe it's deciding whether to add a new central power plant or make an investment in renewable energy, it would have to bid out that process. And what that does is it allows wind power companies, not only would it be compelled to bid out these projects, but it could pay a rate of return on those projects, which according to current Indiana utility law, there would not be a rate of return if a power company were to sign a contract with a renewable energy company, which is one of the big barriers to renewable energy in Indiana. So what this proposal would do is it would initiate a competitive bidding process, and it would pay a rate of return to whoever wins that competitive bidding process. And that has been proven in Colorado to lead to a significant investment in renewable energy. So stay tuned for more on that. Well, we'll make a final call here for questions. We just have a few minutes to go before we sign off. And if no questions come to mind immediately, you can email us at comments@hecweb.org. You could post a question on our Facebook page, which is you can get to by typing facebook.com/HECweb, or you can tweet us at HEC_ED, Edward David. So we'd love to hear you from any of those ways. We also have a Pinterest page for those involved in Pinterest, and we'd love to hear from you either of those ways. And like I said, our next webinar is most likely going to be on Friday, March 29th. We're hedging that date a little bit just because we want to be sensitive to the legislative calendar. So again, let us know if you have any questions or any comments about the quality of the sound, or questions about what we covered. We want to make it interesting and engaging for you, so we'd love to hear from you if there are specific topics that you'd like us to talk about. So with that, we'll call it a day. We'll hope you have a wonderful weekend, and like I said, look forward to staying in touch with you.